starting in just more than a week. Tonight, we are going to talk about ambition, action, and alliances. It's a dark October night here in Stockholm, and the world is quite dark at the moment. So we are very glad to have so many people and organizations with us tonight, and also joining online, who care about the climate, who are determined, and who see opportunities. We have ministers, we have business, we have civil society, academia, government officials, and also some of you work specifically with Nordic collaboration and want to tap that potential even more. My name is Åsa Persson. I'm chair of the Swedish Climate Policy Council and a scientist at the KTH Climate Action Center. But tonight I am your moderator, and we have a great program for you. We're going to start with a common basis of facts, and then we will invite our ministers for a live dialogue, Q&A session, and then we will wrap up with some positive visions for the future. And then a continued mingle to which you're all very warmly invited. But first, to give us an introduction to this evening and share with us what the Nordic Council of Ministers, the organizer, want to get out of this, I'm very happy to invite Karin Elleman, Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers.
Thank you very much, Åsa, and a very warm welcome to you all at this fantastic house. It's actually the House of Norregio, which is a joint Nordic institution dealing with lots of research when it comes to regional development, and Nordic statistics and everything. So if you want other topics, you can go into the hallway and look at the walls and get inspiration from that. But I've been looking so much forward to this Nordic kickoff event towards COP30. It's really a pleasure that so many of you accepted our invitation and all of you joining online. Thank you especially to Nordic ministers, negotiators, researchers, business leaders, and civil society representatives, all gathered to reflect, to connect, and to look ahead. And this event is a continuation of the Nordic Environment and Climate Ministers meeting that was held earlier today. And in total, I could say that this marks the beginning of our joint journey towards COP30 in Belém in Brazil. And the title of this event, Ambition, Alliances, and Action. I mean, that's exactly what we need. Because, also stated by Åsa, the climate crisis really demands bold ambition, concrete action, and of course, strong alliances. And that's why the Nordics matter. The Nordic countries have a long and proud tradition of working together on sustainability. We share values, we share goals, and we share commitment to multilateralism, to transparency, and also to science-based policy. And together, we can amplify our voice and lead by example. And at COP30, we will not only be present, we will be proactive. And we aim for our joint Nordic Pavilion to be a space for dialogue, a space for innovation, and also a space for collaboration. And our work, well, it sounds like it's starting now. Believe me, it's been going on before that. But still, our work starts now by also identifying shared priorities and also building partnerships. And today, the Nordic Ministers for Climate and Environment adopted a joint declaration that's reaffirming our commitment to multilateral environmental governance and science-based climate action. And it really highlights the urgency of the triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and also, of course, the need for coordinated global responses. And the Nordic ministers for fisheries, aquaculture, agriculture, food and forestry will issue also a statement ahead of COP30 highlighting the key role of bioeconomy and food systems in climate action. At COP30, we will be present and also introduce Nordic examples that support the Paris Agreement, that also promote welfare and reduce climate impacts. So these declarations, just to say it clear, it's not just words. They are really call to action. Earlier this autumn, I had the opportunity to have a dialogue with Lena Ylämoinen, the director of European Environmental Agency, about EEA's latest report on Europe's environment. And the findings there are compelling. They show that Europe is the fastest warming continent, that biodiversity loss continues at an alarming rate, and that only a fraction of our environmental goals are on track to be met by 2030. So it was really, to be honest, this eye-opening discussion and also a reminder of the urgency that we face, but of course also looking at the opportunities that we have to act. So we should take this opportunity and act together. And the conversation, the dialogue with Lena really reminded me of the importance of regional leadership and of the role of the Nordics that we can really play in driving meaningful change. And in the next part of the program, we will hear from EEA about the state of the planet and the facts that we simply cannot afford to ignore. And tonight, we will also, of course, hear from our ministers present here about your expectations for the COP30. And we will also be listening to experts about the state of the planet and from voices across sectors about how we can change and how we can shape climate positive futures. So with these introduction words from me, I just want to thank you all for being present here, for being active here. And let's make this time we have together here tonight, let's make this, an evening, a starting point for an even stronger Nordic cooperation and, of course, for a meaningful impact to the COP30. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen, our host this evening. As a scientist, I know that the lead up to a COP is also report season. So we hear about emission gap reports, adaptation gap reports, the NDC synthesis report that came yesterday. One report that I contributed to this year is the 10 new climate science insights, which is coming out tomorrow, and I recommend everyone to read it. It's a seeks to complement IPCC assessments by providing more frequent annual updates on climate science. And if we look at the most recent scientific findings, climate change and impacts on society are accelerating faster than previously thought. So these are the facts and the data. And as Karen said, we also need to have the facts and the data on the policy response side. Is climate policy working? When and where is it insufficient? So, and I think this bigger factual picture is really important also, especially in today's media landscape, where there is which tends to feed on single setbacks, drama, conflicts. Sometimes we miss sight of the longer term trends. And again, to give us this common basis of facts, we're going to hear about the European Environment Agency State of the Environment report conducted only every fifth year. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Suzanne Dale, to join us. Suzanne is Head of Unit of Climate Neutrality, Energy and Mobility at the European Environment Agency. Suzanne, over to you.
Good evening, ministers, colleagues. I'm really honored to be here and to share this presentation with you. When I received the invitation from the organizers to come and present the state of Europe's environment and climate in 8 to 10 minutes, I admit I was daunted. And on my way to from Copenhagen this morning, I was thinking that I could do this in a pretty straightforward way. Describe how well we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, meeting our targets, being a global leader. Or I could dive into the more difficult truths, because even when we're doing a good job here in Europe, even when our policies work and emissions keep falling, our climate keeps changing. Even though we keep working on cutting emissions, we have to build our focus on adapting to the new and constantly changing climate reality. I decided to share that difficult story with you this evening, so here we go. As you might know, the European Environment Agency works on monitoring progress on environment and climate in Europe. We collect hundreds of data sets from your countries, your ministries, maybe your colleagues. Things like air quality information, drinking water quality, recycling rates, greenhouse gas projections. And then we publish regular reports every year showing how things are going. But then we also step back and take the bigger view every 5 years, integrating the hundreds of data sets and synthesizing our analyses. We do this with the Europe's Environment State and Outlook report, and that gives us a comprehensive scientific assessment of Europe's environment and climate. The most recent edition was published here a month ago. And it shows that while on one hand, Europe's nature and biodiversity is in really sharp decline, at the same time, significant progress has been made on climate change. I think this is what you were referring to, Karen. In a single snapshot, this chart shows how things are going right now in Europe. Across 35 topics, it shows with a traffic light basically whether things are improving or are deteriorating or mixed. This includes, for example, greenhouse gas emission reductions. It's going pretty well. It's green. It also includes things like environmental noise and water pollution. They're going less well. Overall, it's a pretty encouraging picture. We're working hard across Europe and it shows, but there's a lot of work to do. But if I update this with the outlook for how things are going in roughly the next 10 to 15 years, the picture shifts a bit. This shows the outlook for future conditions. It's much more yellow. A few reasons for hope: soil resources and chemical pollution go from red to yellow. At the same time, there's a lot less green. Biodiversity investments here and also air pollution, both slipping into yellow. And then global impacts from EU consumption going from yellow to red down in the bottom. It's time to roll up our sleeves. On a lighter note, in Europe, we've cut our net greenhouse gas emissions by 37% since 1990, and we've grown our GDP by more than 60% at the same time. We overachieved our 2020 target really quite significantly, and we're well on our way to meet our 2030 target, the net 55% reduction, if all agreed policies are implemented. That's an extraordinary accomplishment and proof that economic growth and decarbonization can go hand in hand. At the same time, globally, emissions are still rising, and that tells us two things. First, Europe's actions matter. And it's important that we showcase what can be achieved through setting clear targets and supporting them with clear policy tools, like the European Green Deal, like the Clean Industrial Deal. And Europe's leadership is still needed in the global negotiations to keep ambitions high, also in Belém. If we look across Europe's economic sectors, we can see some successes in a little bit more detail. Here we see 2005 emissions, 2023 emissions, and where we need to be in 2030. The energy sector, for example, here on the left, and industry next to it, both delivering major reductions since 2005. This is largely a testament to our emissions trading system. Renewables now provide a quarter of the EU's energy, and our primary energy use has dropped by almost a fifth since 2005. At the same time, further along, transport and agriculture still remain challenging. Our data show that last year, the transport sector overtook energy as our largest emitting sector in Europe. That's pretty big news. And while we're taking concrete steps to transition to zero-emission vehicles and invest in alternative fuels, we're still really dependent on fossil fuels. And then there's the land sector, all the way at the end. Land use change, and forestry, or LULUCF for short. This includes our forests, our soils, our wetlands, the part of our climate system that literally grounds us. And it's going in the wrong direction. Dig into that a little more. So for decades, we've counted on the land sector as a strong ally. All the figures below this zero line here, they show the size of our European carbon sink. It's still removing CO2 from the atmosphere, but the trend is heading in the wrong direction, which is critical because when we talk about net zero, it's because we know there will still be some emissions that we won't be able to avoid, at least in the beginning, and that we need to balance those with removals. We also need to strengthen our bioeconomy in its own right. So what's going on? Our forests are maturing and sequestering carbon more slowly. Our tree felling has increased, partly driven by markets and also partly by salvage after storms or pest outbreaks. And of course, climate change itself is hitting our forests. Fires, droughts, bark beetles, all reducing forest's ability to act as carbon sinks. But here lies also a major opportunity, especially for us in the Nordic region. If we get this right, the land sector can again become a pillar of our climate strategy. Protecting the carbon sink, for example, by avoiding peatland drainage, prevents future emissions. Improving the management of forests, croplands, and grasslands increases resilience and long-term sequestration. Restoring degraded ecosystems is absolutely critical, alongside planting trees, introducing agroforestry systems. All these measures help us both to mitigate and to adapt. And it's also this kind of action that delivers multiple benefits: better biodiversity, better climate resilience, and better protection for people and infrastructure. Going back to the tiles that I showed in the beginning, this is part of turning things green again. So in other words, the land sector is where climate, nature, and the economy meet. Now, I know you're probably thinking this sounds incredibly expensive. How are we going to finance this when we have so many competing priorities? And it's a fair question because the costs of climate impacts are already enormous. Since 1980, climate-related disasters have cost the EU over 822 billion euros. Less than 20% of those losses were insured. Just in the last 4 years, which you see over on the right-hand side, damages have reached 208 billion euros, from floods in Western Europe to wildfires in the south to storms in the north. So yes, adaptation and land restoration require investment, but inaction is far more expensive. And if there's something that I'd like for you to take home from this talk, it's that we have to treat climate preparedness as economic resilience. So the good news is that we already have many of the tools that we need. Policy levers are in place through the European Green Deal, through national climate laws, through new frameworks like the European Climate Adaptation Plan, the LULUCF regulation to improve the accounting of our carbon sink, the nature restoration law targets for protected areas on land and at sea, new opportunities from technologies like Copernicus land monitoring. But implementation needs to be our focus, with an accent on synergies. In the land sector, nature credits could reward both emission reductions and biodiversity gains at the same time. And even as we succeed, the climate keeps changing. We need to keep adapting. And Europe, as Karin said, is now the fastest warming continent on the planet. We've built a climate policy framework that fundamentally works. Now we have to apply that same determination to our land and our nature, turning policies into places and numbers into living ecosystems. Because in the end, it's not just about meeting the targets. It's about safeguarding our landscapes and our livelihoods and the Nordic and the European way of life. And if there's any region that can lead the way, it's us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susanne. Really great summary in such a short time. It's a big report. But some areas for concern: land carbon sinks, transport, agriculture, consumption footprints, but also you said it looks like Europe as a whole is on track to meet the 2030 targets, which is significant in these times of a COP. Quick question to you. So this was Europe as a whole. What can you say about the Nordic region? Are the Nordic countries still leaders or laggards or middle of the field?
Yeah. Maybe I can start actually with this last slide that I have up here. This QR code gives you access directly to the Europe's Environment 2025 report. It has 3 parts. The first part is a really large, heavy synthesis report that pulls everything together. The middle part is these thematic snapshots that goes into a lot more detail on these 35 tiles that I showed. The third part is country spaces. And we've co-created the country spaces with country representatives who are part of the network that the agency works with. And it digs really, really deeply into how every country that's part of the European Environment Agency, including the cooperating countries, it's not just the EU, how every country is doing also on climate change. Specifically on the Nordics, I'd say yes, we're still performing well, and we're advancing in both mitigation and adaptation efforts. We have a really long-standing tradition for setting the agenda in this area, and I think we continue to do so even though a lot of the low-hanging fruits have already been harvested. We're pursuing the energy transition, we're reducing our energy consumption, we're deploying renewables. We've dispelled the myth that heat pumps don't work in colder climates. But saying that, I think like every other country in the world, we have a lot of work to do too. And I already touched upon the example of the land sector as one area. I'd say that on the road to Belém, the Nordics have an opportunity, as you said in your opening, to really stand united. And at the same time, being aware that even with the lowest numbers that are on the table, the NDC that we put forward will be one of the most ambitious in the world. And maintaining that really, really high ambition is absolutely critical for breaking the curve that I showed on the right-hand side, the global emissions.
Great. Thank you so much, Susanne. So, we are now going to move to the next part of the program, which is the dialogue with our climate ministers. And we are very pleased to have climate ministers from 4 Nordic countries with us tonight. Please join me on the stage. And we will organize here with some tables. And while you are getting ready, let me also say to the audience that in the spirit of Nordic values of openness and democracy, we have invited questions for the ministers. And when you signed up, you were asked to submit written questions in advance. If we have time tonight, we will also open up for some additional questions. So to the audience, please be prepared. Yes, so warm welcome to you. You have been busy with Nordic meetings for a couple of days. And we have with us tonight, starting from the left, Andreas Bjelland Eriksen, Minister of Climate and Environment from Norway. We have Sari Multala, Minister for Climate and Environment, Finland. Romina Pourmokhtari, Minister of Climate and Environment, Sweden. And Margit Stora, Minister of Environment from the Faroe Islands. So before going into that dialogue phase, Q&A, we will give the floor to the ministers to share some opening remarks, sharing their expectations and ambitions for COP30. So let's start with Finland. You are the chair of the Nordic Council of Ministers this year. Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. We had very good meetings today and showing again Nordic unitedness and ambition, also going towards the COP30 in Belém. And I'm really happy for that because this is something we really are going to need. It's going to be a difficult COP for sure, and then the rumors intensifying all the time that there might be very difficult to reach good conclusions. And at the same time, we know already the NDCs that have already been delivered and the ones that hopefully will be delivered, like ours from the EU, are not going to meet the ambition level of needed of the scientific advice of the Paris Agreement. And there needs to be, and our wish for the COP would be that there would be a negotiated outcome that would outline the way forward, how to bridge this gap internationally, globally. I think what we have to bring to the table as Nordic countries, especially, is the figures actually that we just saw. That it is possible to be both ambitious in climate goals and also action, and at the same time being competitive. And I think this is a very strong message that we have and we can send to the world and be united in this and show example of how this can be done, and without also increasing the costs for our people, living costs for our people too much, so that it is still fair and it is possible to do this in a fair manner and doing good for our global environment, but also for our own countries at the same time. So I think my expectations are, let's say, a bit divided. I'm hopeful that we can be united and stronger in that way in the Nordic countries. And of course, it's very important that we are also the ones that are European Union members. We are always speaking almost at the same voice, you could say. And we are the ones pushing for high ambition also within European Union. So I'm really hoping, and I know that this will be the case also in preparation for the COP. And thank you for those discussions today also in the ministerial meetings. Thank you. Thank you, Sari. So some divided expectations. Over to Norway, Andreas.
Thank you, and I fully share the perspectives that Sari has already shared. I think the most important thing for this COP is to be able to address and assess the gap between where the NDCs for 2035 will take us and the goals that we actually have agreed together in the Paris Agreement. At the same time, from the Nordic perspective, a lot of things that we would like to see are not going to be possible to conclude on. But there are many important things that we can conclude on in Belém. If you look now, for the first time, we can actually get a permanent working program on financing streams, for example. And I mean, we won't be able to solve the challenges that we're facing internationally if we aren't able to direct international capital flows into the projects that actually follow the goals that we have set in the Paris Agreement. On rainforests, for example, I mean, the COP being in Belém, we have concrete, innovative financial solutions like the TFFF that the Brazilian presidency has been putting forward. We can work on that and bring in new innovative financial tools that will cut emissions and protect biodiversity at the same time. And also on climate finance, I think we can help also broaden the discussion a little bit, because in many countries, I don't think it's financing that is necessarily the biggest issue. I mean, the cheapest source of electricity globally today is from solar, is from renewable sources. But the systems, the markets, the mechanisms in many countries are not in place to be able to actually build it out. That is also an area where the Nordic countries can show how it can be done and also help others learn how it can be done. Finally, I think one of the most important things the Nordic countries bring to Belém is perspective. And the perspective is a realistic one. Climate change is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening here and now. But it's also an optimistic one. And I think that's quite important. Because as the world looks today, it's very easy to get very saddened and get very dark about how everything looks. But today we celebrate, or this year we celebrate 10 years of the Paris Agreement. And if you look at where we were headed 10 years ago, we have shifted the world in the right direction, and a big step in the right direction. And every decimal that we can continue shifting the world in the right direction counts. It is a better and safer and richer world to live in. So to be able to also bring in that perspective that we are going in the right direction, that meeting at COPs, although I think we all can agree is frustrating sometimes, it's much better than the alternative not meeting at COPs. And we will utilize that to continue increasing the ambition and also the deliverance from the climate COPs going forward.
Thank you so much. So bringing perspective, and you also brought up some concrete outcomes of financing that you're hoping for. Let's move to the Faroe Islands, Margit.
Thank you. And let me start by emphasizing that the Faroe Islands are participating in COP30 as part of the Kingdom of Denmark's delegation. We are not an independent party in the negotiations, but we enjoy a close and effective cooperation with Denmark, which ensures that Faroese interests are both heard and represented. Denmark and the Faroe Islands have established a cooperation agreement on international climate negotiation. This agreement sets the framework for our bilateral collaborations and gives us an opportunity to contribute to Denmark's position and indirectly to those of the European Union. This year, Denmark plays a special role as the holder of the EU presidency and will therefore speak on behalf of the EU at COP30. Through our cooperation agreement, however, the Faroe Islands have had the opportunity to influence the position that Denmark brings forward in the EU preparatory process. In conclusion, I would like to highlight some of the initiatives that we are already working on in the Faroe Islands. First, the Faroe Islands will participate in the next round of designated emission controls areas, which will reduce the emission of soot in the North Atlantic and thereby help prevent ocean acidification and the accelerated melting in the Arctic. The ECA area along the shipping routes from Portugal to Greenland will enter into force in 2027, and by then all the Nordic countries will have designated sea areas in ECAs in accordance with the Marpol Convention. Secondly, we are currently conducting preliminary studies on the potential of basalt formations to store and transform CO2. It is still too early to determine whether the Faroe Islands will be able to join the GON alliance, but we are following developments closely. And third, we are working to map wetlands and other natural areas that should be protected due to their ability to sequester CO2. The ocean is our most important resource, and we are deeply committed to ensuring that our marine areas maintain their capacity to absorb and store carbon. So the Faroe Islands may be a small society, but we have great ambitions, and we believe that the Nordic countries together can show the world how responsibility, innovation, and cooperation can drive a truly green transition, including in the blue sector. And let's use COP30 to send the message that sustainability and economic strength can go hand in hand, and that even small islands communities can make a big difference for the global climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margit and the Faroe Islands, for mentioning some concrete issues and actions you are working on, soot emissions and CO2 storage among them. So, last but not least, Romina Pourmokhtari, for Sweden? What are your expectations and ambitions?
Thank you so much. And first of all, welcome everyone to Stockholm and to Sweden. It's lovely to have the fellow Nordic colleagues visiting our country, and also lovely to have such a strong Finnish leadership in the council. I think we've had lovely meetings and lovely discussions on difficult topics, and we don't always agree either. We have different standpoints on different matters, but we sit down and we cooperate and we try to figure out how we can find the best ways going forward and keeping that pace. And I think that is such an important message and such important work in these times where we are seeing maybe a bit of a different attitude towards the multilateral community and towards cooperation in general. So I'd like to start there. But when we discuss COP30, as we're doing today, and climate matters, I think it is difficult to do that without just discussing the presence of a different voice in the negotiations and in the discussions around climate. And this is unfortunately the voice of a president of a very powerful country, where Donald Trump stands in the United Nations General Assembly and says that if you go green, you go bankrupt. And this message it's so important for the Nordic countries to show up in those meeting rooms, show up at those negotiations, and showcase the fact that this is completely incorrect. And the fact that all of our Nordic countries have shown that we are not creating economic growth and prosperous communities despite taking care of the planet, despite working on sustainability. We are creating economic growth and prosperous societies because we are investing in climate, because we are investing in environment, and because we are taking care of lessening pollution in our countries. So I think that it is such an important message that we bring to the negotiations nowadays, unfortunately, more relevant to push on than before. And if I'm supposed to be a bit concrete here, I think it will sound as if we have shared our notes with each other or something, because it is, of course, very similar, the priorities looking at the negotiations more concretely. It's very important that we outline the way forward to bridge the gap as it looks right now, because if we don't do that, it devaluates the message that we all are very proud of that we have and that we have had for 10 years, and the Paris Agreement and the goals that we have set to achieve. So it's very important that we outline the way forward to bridge that gap. And with the gap, I'm talking about the gap from the NDCs to the goals that we have set. And this, of course, requires that EU does what EU needs to do, and therefore we are all rooting for our Danish colleagues in the Nordics who are set to handle the negotiations. There has been some today, some on Friday, and then the ministers will gather on Tuesday, and this will be very important for what we bring to the table at the COP. But it's also very good to hear the presentation that was held before us ministers came up on stage, because it's very important that we don't bite into the message that it would be a backlash if our NDCs doesn't meet up to the high standards that we set, because it would be very difficult in the negotiations if that's what EU brings to the table as the most ambitious continent. So I think it's very important to stress the fact that the reason for us having such difficult discussions now in the EU, it's actually a very, very good reason. Because we have gone from discussing goals and ambitions to actually implementing them. We are implementing effort-sharing regulations. We are implementing emissions trading systems. We are working and having dialogue with our agri-sector, who are very concerned now of how will this affect the work that we do. And we are having discussions with our transport sector. How can our trucks work in these systems? And we're getting to the implementation phase. And that is the main reason for us also having these challenges and these difficult discussions, not a matter of a political backlash, but actually the fact that we're in the phase of truly transitioning. And this is a good thing. So I think that is something to keep with us when we bring also the message. And as Swedes, we always say urgency and opportunity. And that's the message that we bring. But it's, of course, very similar to what my Norwegian colleague mentioned. And that is a perspective that the Nordics need to bring, especially in times of Donald Trump and other political leaders trying to set a picture of going green means going bankrupt, because there are many countries that are motivated by the economic factor and unfortunately not as much by the sustainability factor. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. So several of you highlight the need to tell the story of decoupling of emissions and economic prosperity, I think, not losing sight of that bigger story among the weeds of COP agenda items. I'm sure we will come back to the question on Nordic and EU interrelationship. It came up in the audience questions. But before doing that, we unfortunately did not have the Danish climate minister here tonight, Lars Aagaard, but we're happy to have a senior representative of the Danish government. If you will please come up. Christian Stenberg from the Ministry of Climate and Energy and Utilities. You want to share the Danish perspective briefly with us?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, the Danish minister couldn't be here today due to the duties of the presidency, but I'm very glad that our kingdom is ably represented here by you, Minister, and thank you so much. We value our close cooperation with you and with Greenland on representing our interests at the global stage. So Denmark holds the EU presidency during this half of the year. Last week, we adopted the EU's COP mandate for Belém. We saw the synthesis report come out yesterday, and unfortunately, there's at least one NDC still missing from that report. It's a bit of an elephant in the room, but that is the EU's NDC. We are doing our utmost to achieve agreement on the European climate law and a target for 2040, from which we will seek to derive the EU's NDC for 2035. And this is, I think, if we achieve this, it would be a major accomplishment and would give the EU a very, very strong mandate to play a positive role in creating an outcome at COP30. And as the Swedish minister said, this is difficult. It's difficult because we are actually implementing. It's also difficult because the target is incredibly ambitious. 90%. It's built on the advice of Suzanne and colleagues at the European Environmental Agency. It's a science-based target that we are aiming for. And it will cover 27 countries from the northern tip of Sweden and Finland all the way to Cyprus. We have reduced, at this point, emissions by 37% compared to 1990 levels. In just another 15 years, we'll have to bring that down to 90% reduction. That is enormous, and we are getting closer and closer to gaining this agreement. And I think that would be hugely encouraging. The Danish minister has called upon an extraordinary environmental council next week on Tuesday, where we hope to land an agreement. And we are very, very hopeful that we can achieve this and achieve a strong NDC. Sitting at the end of the table, I can absolutely make certain that we would not be even close to this level of ambition without very, very strong Nordic colleagues within the EU pressing for this result, especially Sweden and Finland, very, very strong voices, not just for a high level of ambition, but also realistic tools to achieving these targets. And I hope you will continue your hard work all the way until the finish line on Tuesday and to very, very late nights going into Wednesday, most probably. Our COP mandate will then be strong. We will have to. This COP does have to address the gap. We got the report yesterday. We know it's there, and it has to be addressed. And you mentioned it's dark outside. That's true. The report does show gaps. Multilateralism is pressed, but as the Norwegian ministers, we also have to reminded us this morning and also this evening. We have to find positivism and optimism in order to encourage action and get a global result. But this COP cannot be a success without addressing this gap. But we also need a balanced outcome across a number of items, and this also includes adaptation. Adaptation is important for every country across the globe, but especially for the least developed countries, and we must have progress on adaptation at this COP. And finally, we agreed on a financing target last year, and we need to deliver on that target and show progress from public funds, but also from private funds that will make up the bulk of financing. So how can we unleash private finance to actually provide the finance necessary? And one final point, which I also think brings Nordic ministers together, is that human rights is also incredibly important. We need to promote and protect all human rights in climate action, and this includes gender equality, the rights of women, girls, and the rights of indigenous peoples. And that is also an area where EU will be particularly strong at this COP in promoting those interests. So as the Danish EU presidency, we count on continued strong Nordic voices inside the EU and also outside the EU, all the way until we can hopefully celebrate a successful outcome in Belém.
Thank you, Christian. And
Good.
If we have questions for Denmark specifically, we hope that Christian can have time to answer them. He needs to leave a little bit early. Okay, question time. I think we'll start with a question from me and then open the floor here for the submitted questions. But clearly, the Nordic region has big aspirations when it comes to leadership. But as all countries, you also face dilemmas at home, and there are also strong points of critiques of climate policies and domestic action, whether it's management of forests, the carbon sink, increasing transport emissions, continued oil and gas extraction, and I think many countries are struggling with the agriculture sector. Can you give the audience some concrete examples how you wish to exercise credible leadership, where you have skin in the game, and when do other countries really listen to what you have to say in negotiations? If one or two of you want to pick up on that.
Everyone's looking at me, so I guess I can start. But I can take the obvious example from Norway, of course, being an oil and gas producer. And many people ask me if I think it's very difficult to be an oil and gas producer in the climate negotiations. And my perspective is, I don't think it's more difficult to be an oil and gas producer than being an oil and gas consumer, because it's the sum of our activities that are creating the problem that we're facing right now. But at the same time, if we're going to solve those issues and being able to phase out fossil fuel consumption in sector after sector is basically a coordination problem between producing countries and consuming countries, if we're going to do it in a viable way that both safeguards energy security, businesses, but at the same time safeguard climate, then we do not need, both as consumers or producers of oil and gas, to go to the climate COPs and just talk about everything that's great. We also need to talk about the things that are actually difficult when we're trying to do this in practice. And that is what I think we have solved in many ways in Europe and in the EU. And while we have our separate NDC, as many of you know, we are basically a fully integrated part of the European climate policy, at least until 2030, because we are part of the ETS, we are part of the effort sharing regulation, we're part of the LULUCF. So every obligation that other EU countries have, we are also having those obligations. And that is a great thing. That's a fantastic thing, because it means that Norwegian oil and gas, both when it is produced in Norway, but also when it's consumed in Europe, the CO2 emissions are priced. And 100% of Norwegian gas exports goes to Europe. 85% of Norwegian oil goes to Europe. So it basically means that when we're talking about solving the coordination problem and the phasing out and transitioning away, or whatever we want to call it in the UN context, that is actually the approach that we have in Europe. And we talk to other oil and gas countries and other oil and gas consuming countries that we basically need the same kind of coordination tools in an international space, because the lack of that is basically the issue that we're facing today. And we know that that is going to be difficult. The easy way to do it would be to put a global price on carbon emissions. It's the right way to do. I think all Nordic countries are pro that way of doing it, but it's impossible to do it in the climate context. And then the discussion should perhaps be, okay, but what then? What are the other tools that we can utilize in the international context? And I think that tools that the EU are now developing, such as CBAM, is very interesting tools for actually being able to sort of scale up the efforts and the coordination that we already have today to phase out fossil fuel consumption, and could also influence other regions to do parts of the same that we are doing here.
Thank you so much. And over to Romina and then to Sari.
There's many things that can be mentioned here, of course, but to build on what Andreas has been speaking of, I think that there are one thing that we can truly showcase, at least from Sweden's side, is the fact that we have a very close cooperation with industry and with academia and with politics, and that this triple helix is quite important and has been very important for the journey that Sweden has made. And sometimes when I discuss with political leaders from other countries, it seems as if they have the perspective that Sweden is such a rich country that industry does this as a favor, or does this to be kind, or does this to showcase their good morals and marketing. Yeah, and then I need to, in fact, be quite clear on the matter that the dialogue that we have with industry has for quite some decades now been very sharp. It's a matter of you either change or it will cost you quite large amounts of money. And we've had carbon taxation since before I was born. So that's always a good context to give to the view that, you know, the rich countries do things in a certain manner that would never be possible in our countries. That is a very dangerous perspective to have. So I think that it's important to raise the fact that we do have a lovely discussion. We drink some coffee and have some fika when we meet with our industries, but we're also quite sharp on the fact that if you don't shift and if you don't apply to the legislation that's adopted, to the plans that we've set up with climate targets, you're going to be in big trouble. You're going to be picking up breadcrumbs from a fossil economy that doesn't exist. And that is creating sort of a stress also that creates a development that we're very clear on. And this is what CBAM is also building on, right? Because we're not seeing that same response from the international economy, from the globalized economy that we're living in. And therefore, we need to have regulations such as CBAM. And this has been, of course, criticized by some countries that this is a matter of tariffs, climate tariffs, and we can be quite clear there that we've been ambitious for some time. We've been making our message very clear, and we won't allow other countries' economy benefiting from the Nordic economies transitioning and doing the actual work. It's going to be met with regulations, and the regulations are not only national or European, they're broadening to also becoming CBAM. So that's also actually a personal favorite of mine.
Thank you. Sari.
Yes, maybe just trying to be short here, but mention something that we are having problems with, as many of you know, is our LULUCF sector. And I think maybe the one solution, or maybe at least two solutions that we are investigating at the moment to this problem, is trying to find ways that can benefit many goals. For example, biodiversity and climate change at the same time. As Susanne mentioned, the peatlands, for example. We actually are about to set a working group on investigating how we can use the eastern border peatlands in order to meet our nature restoration law targets, but at the same time on biodiversity, but at the same time doing good for our climate, and maybe also having some positive effects on our national security. So we are doing this together with our Department of Defense, Ministry of Defense, together with the Ministry of Environment. And I'm really hopeful that, because we have already decided we're gonna add the expenses on defense a lot in the coming years, and part of this can be something else than hard defense investment. So I'm hoping that this could be one of the solutions on this front. And then another one is the nature credits market that we are developing. First, they are going to be based on voluntarity, on our nature offset system that we already have in our legislation. But later on, we can go further. And we've just talked to the scientists who we also have a very close cooperation with in Finland as well. And that's they've sort of confirmed that this is the way to go, to at first trying to build the market, the trust to the markets, and by having credible also verifying system for the credits, and then later on it might need some extra push from legislation as well. And we are going to bring this hopefully to as part of our legislation as well already during this government period. So I think there are ways we can go further in also in these very difficult sectors where we have problems at the moment. And maybe just coming back to that picture that was shown as well, where between the different sectors, that we see that already the traffic is polluting more than our energy sector. That shows that these most cost-effective measures that we have is the ETS, and that's why Finland and Sweden as well are in favor of enlarging the ETS to road transport and the effort sharing sector in larger ways. So I think these kind of tools are the most cost efficient because they also work for the single market benefits. So we can't forget that why we are in the EU. It is because we want to be stronger economically. We have the single markets, and then we need also rules that are applying at least for us, and then widening as Romina was saying, for example, with the CBAM to outside of Europe as well.
Thank you. We are warmed up, I think. And thank you for trying to be brief, so we can have time now for many questions. Let's show that Nordic efficiency in doing things. So actually a question that came from several people, from Malin Larsson, that's Swedish EPA, not sure you are here, but also people from Vattenfall and Stockholm Resilience Center. They are wondering, what is the added value of Nordic collaboration? I mean, you have talked about that you like working together, you have shared interest, but especially considering, I mean, the EU joint positions, where do you see, is there a certain gap that Nordic cooperation can fill? If you want to go elaborate a little bit on that, 1 or 2 ministers, if you want to have a go. Romina first.
I can very shortly mention that one gap that perhaps will be bridged in a few years if Norway decides to join the EU, but it's not happening right now. So we're actually a bit also enjoying the fact that we're in different groups. So it's very good to have the Nordic colleagues when we're actually on the negotiating grounds. Then we can discuss the different strategic angles from different groups. And I remember very sharply when Andreas had just recently become minister, and we were negotiating in Dubai. And I came with a very Swedish perspective in our discussions with the oil countries, and Norway came with a very Norwegian perspective. And it was actually quite the strategic benefit to the outcome on transitioning away from fossil fuels in Dubai. So I remember that I left that meeting thinking, there are perks and cons of having this cooperation despite being in different groups and having very different stance on oil.
Strategic collaboration. Sorry?
Yes, I think this is one part. And then, of course, within EU, it's quite important because we, at least with Sweden, we mostly share almost exactly the same problems, but also the same views that we have. And I think that is very easy then to go to the meetings and trying to work there together without sometimes even having to discuss that much. But we know where we stand and how we can work together. And I really thank the Danish presidency for really doing a good job so far, and I hope that really that we are able to, because this is going to be the tough one on Tuesday, and of course also this helps us because that you have our support and pushing for higher ambition, because this is definitely needed now from us, because obviously the presidency has to be more diplomatic. But also, I guess one of the Nordic approaches has always been one of pragmatism. So we understand that we can't always achieve everything. So we are always ready also to compromise where we need that we will have to in order to make a result. And this is something that I sometimes lack in maybe other EU member states. And this is, I think, also a strength. So we know that which are the most important goals that we need to meet. And then on the less important ones, we can maybe give in. So I think that is a very a prominent factor of being a Nordic country, that we are all very pragmatic also when it comes to negotiations. And And hopefully that doesn't mean, at least in the European level or in the COP, that we will be soft, which I think we are not. We are always knowing where we stand and quite clear about our goals and targets as well, which is always important when we are in these international meetings, and also that we speak on unanimous voice when we sit on different tables. So yes,
thank you. Now we have a question from We Don't Have Time, Civil Society. I think we can say you are. Ingmar Rensog, do you want to ask your question on the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty?
Remember the question put forward, but I would like to hear about the Nordic stance around the non-proliferation fossil fuel, the non-fossil fuel proliferation treaty. That is all about that we need to end fossil fuel and have an end date. Colombia's announced that they will have a conference around phasing out. And do we have a Nordic stance on this issue? Will Nordic join this treaty in the future?
Who wants to take this?
I can start if no one else. I think that there are several things that we can agree on within the Nordic community. We had a good discussion this morning around the wording on our common statement that the Nordic Ministers' Council perhaps already has published or will publish. So there are some stances around this topic which we can agree on, but there are also differences. And Sweden has been part of the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance for quite some time, and I think that BOGA, Finland as well, and I think that BOGA is a good sort of a field for us to cooperate, where we can take it further than we can right now in the Nordic region, which is of course very important. And there's also very important discussions on how to have a strong strategy from the countries that want to phase out. But to not only answer the easy part of this question, also mention the difficult part of this question. I mean, we have, for example, right now a situation in Europe where we still subsidize fossil fuels quite a lot. And this is very, very difficult, very sensitive topic in many countries, even in the Nordic countries. And I think that this is something that we need to work a lot more on, how to make sure to build the confidence to be able to phase out the subsidies that we still have within the fossil fuels, because they are very, very bad. Looking at the situation we're in, it's absurd that we're still subsidizing to the extent that we are. And this is a matter of just transition and a matter of dialogue with, for example, the agricultural community. That's quite difficult, but that should be had by many European countries, and definitely where the Nordics should lead the way.
Thank you, Andreas. A non-proliferation treaty.
Thank you. So I think it depends a bit on what approach you have on how we are going to efficiently phase out the emissions that we need to phase out in the next couple of decades. And at least to me, I think it's a little bit dangerous when politicians go into specific technologies and decide on which technologies we can utilize or not. To me, the way that the ETS function, and the reason why the ETS is a fantastic system, is that it has no quotas left in 2040, at least with the existing regulation. So everyone, if it's the oil and gas industry or it's the processing industry, they know that emissions have to be zero by 2040. There is no way around that. But what technologies they utilize to be able to deploy that in a cost-efficient way is up to the industry to decide in practice. That means if they succeed with carbon capture and storage, we can utilize some fossil fuels in Europe in 2040. And to be honest and realistic, I think we're probably going to need that, because to perceive that all industry will have invested in new production facilities in the next 15 years, I mean, then we need to do a lot of capital investments that I cannot fully see where it's going to come from in the next 15 years, given the challenges that we have on both public and private budgets already today. So to me, I don't necessarily disagree with the goal, and I have discussed well with Colombia the things that we need to do with fossil fuels going forward. And we need to, obviously, in any scenario where we're phasing out fossil fuels in many sectors and phasing out emissions in total, produce much less oil and gas in the future than we do today. And that will be the effect of regulations such as ETS, also for Norway, and that's okay. But I still think we should be a bit conservative on going into basically deciding on technology approaches. And if you say basically no oil and gas for any sector by 2040 or 2050, then basically we have limited solutions that we are probably going to need if we're going to have cost-efficient ways of reaching net zero's emissions in the next 25 years.
Thank you. So we are moving on. We had very quick.
You talk about fossil fuel as technology. Is it really a technology, the fuel? Isn't it how we produce the fuel? We can produce, e-fuel and don't need to dig it up from the ground. Is it really a technology question? If you take when we had the ozone crisis, we still have fridges, but we banned the substance that are dangerous. I mean, fossil fuel from the ground is quite dangerous, don't you agree? According to science.
What is dangerous is burning fossil fuels and allowing the emissions to go up into the atmosphere. And that is the problem I think that we need to regulate. I mean, when we in the 1970s had a lot of chemicals going from the processing industry and straight into Norwegian fjords, we didn't put the regulation ban on production of the things that the processing industry was producing. We put the regulation on the fact that they were not allowed to emit chemicals into the fjords. And then it was their problem to find out how to do that in practice. And then for me, the perspective here is also, I mean, if we're going to solve everything with e-fuels going forward, that is probably going to increase global emissions because, I mean, biofuels is a limited resource. We cannot utilize that for everything. The petrochemical sector, for example, utilize petroleum products, but we have no concrete alternatives to design those products, also for medicines, for example, in the market today. So the most efficient way of dealing with the climate crisis is to put the regulation on where the problem is, which is emission into the atmosphere. That is going to result in the fact that we produce much less oil and gas in the future than what we're doing today, and that is a good thing. But it might allow for some consumption of oil and gas in sectors where there are few other efficient alternatives if we succeed in deploying technologies that can capture and permanently store those emissions instead of allowing them to go into the atmosphere.
Thank you very much. To be debated further, but we will move on. We had two very interesting questions submitted from Nordic Energiforskning. Klaus Putte, you had one on negative emissions, whether Nordic should come together more on that. The other one was on the global energy targets to triple renewables and to double the rate of energy efficiency in by 2030. I mean, which question would you prioritize here, given limited time?
Now I see I can remember the question, but I think if I take the climate target, both Denmark, Sweden, and Finland are part of the group of negative emitters, the GON Alliance. So my question is also because now you have mentioned CCS that Norway is well leading on, and you have also mentioned that you are working on try to store carbon capture in the Faroe Islands. So my question is, of course, is there a perspective of having a Nordic alliance within the GON Alliance?
Maybe just reflect a little what we had we discussed today on the meeting. Actually, there was one of our initiatives to talk about the CCS and the collaboration that we can have and the projects that we have already in place during this presidency. And I was really happy to hear that Denmark, who's going to be presidency next year for the Nordic Council of Ministers, will be continuing on this front and actually enlarging it to the CCU. So I think it is a start of deepening our collaboration. And as bilateral contracts, we already have a contract with Norway and Denmark on the CCS, because we don't have that capacity to store the CO2 in Finland. But on the other hand, we have a lot of potential in the bio-CCU together with, for example, green hydrogen production And I think there we have to, coming back to a little bit the previous question, is also that we have to look at the possibilities that we have. And actually the solution, I think, phasing out, getting rid of the fossil fuels is to give the possibility to different technologies by setting the price on carbon and the emissions. And that is what partly we are trying to now do with the ETS2 system, of course. And then we need better solutions also for air and sea traffic, which are one of the hard to abate sectors, and working on that as well. But definitely, I think, answering your question, there is room for even deeper collaboration, and we are now on that path already within the Nordic Council of Ministers.
Romina?
For us in Sweden, it's very important that the negative emissions are handled in the correct way to actually maintain the confidence in these types of technologies. And I think that one thing that's very important for us to stress is the fact that, for example, in aviation sector or in industry, this will not be an ersättning, an alternative to lowering the emissions and eliminating the emissions in these sectors. So for us, it's quite important to make sure of that. And other than that, I think in Sweden is perhaps a bit famous in the negative emissions area for example, the big deal between Microsoft and Stockholm Exergi. It's the biggest deal on bio-CCS that's written in the world. But I also think that we should have a look at the utilization projects that are also happening. There's a lot of carbon utilization projects that are ongoing now, happening, and they are very important to showcase a future where CO2 and perhaps other greenhouse gases aren't only a problem and a challenge for global warming, but can actually be utilized as a source as a resource. Let's stop there for the sake of the time.
Thank you, Andreas.
I can just be brief and say I think at least on one point we have a very strong interest in strong Nordic cooperation just in the near future. Because one of the major issues within the ETS system today is obviously that negative emissions do not create a benefit within the system. You don't get a price on negative emissions. And waste incineration plants, for example, which is a good example of places where we need CCS technology going forward. A lot of what they capture is biogenic CO2. So if they don't get a price on negative emissions, the entire business concept totally collapses because it's never profitable to actually do it in practice. And this is areas where both Norway and the Nordic countries in general have been world leaders. And it's an area where in the coming ETS revision, I think we have a very strong common interest in getting it right going forward.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to start wrapping up. But I just want to flag, we did get questions also on how the Nordic countries can work on climate mitigation in the marine sector. Interesting now after the failed negotiations under IMO. How Nordic companies can be rewarded and not penalized as leaders in climate action. We had questions on better considering water in NDCs and national adaptation plans, and how to work more on innovation. So I hope some of this discussion can continue also in the mingle. I wanted to ask a final brief question. So just very brief, one sentence answers. But really, given the, as you said, quite dark world now and then significant challenges to climate cooperation, what would you think would be a positive outcome of COP30? What do you hope that it can achieve? Starting with you, Andreas.
I think if we can be able to both address and assess the big gap between NDCs and where we need to be if we're to reach the target in the Paris Agreement. We won't have all the answers on how to address it, but that would be a really good step forward for the next couple of COPs.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, to add on that, of course, then also going forward with the adaptation and the indicators on that sector, I think that is also important.
And to add on the two things mentioned, I'll say to make sure that we have a field within the UNFCCC to showcase and share the solutions we found, the progress we've made, because we know that the solutions are available, and the Nordics are a great example of that. So we need to make sure to utilize that experience and share it to more countries, rather than getting stuck in the perhaps negotiating areas, which get stuck on words and goals and numbers. We also need to get to the solutions.
Margit.
Yeah, I hope we can have the discussion how we best can support the green transition in the blue sector in the coming years, so that we can achieve our long-term climate goals.
Let's thank the ministers very much. And wish them success in Belém. So we have heard now of some big global challenges. Also, we saw that Europe is facing challenges, and indeed the Nordic countries as well, accelerating the climate transition and ensuring a safe climate. But we also heard about the determination from the governments and I think also other actors in the room to do something about this. But we have not discussed so much yet on the why. Why are we taking all this climate action? Can it really lead to a better living for humans now and in the future? So I'd like to invite our second to last speaker tonight, Gita Boring. Welcome. Gita is head of communication at the Concito climate think tank in Copenhagen, Denmark. And you told me earlier that you are very frustrated with this doom and gloom discourse on climate change. But unlike many of us who might just observe this, you decided to do something about it. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Åsa. And thank you for that fine introduction. It's truly an honor to be here today and speak on this very important topic of hope. And it's so much to the point when you mentioned my frustration. So what did I do with it? I wrote a book. It's a book about visions for a climate positive future, and also a roadmap for how do we get there. In Danish, the title is Det ender grønt. It's really a prophecy of saying that the future will be green, in contrast to the other side, a black and fossil future, which is not really a sustainable option. So I wrote the book out of a strong belief that we need to change the climate conversation. It needs to be more hopeful. And built into that is that we need to talk not just to the head, but also to the hearts of people. Because what we can imagine shapes what we can create. And in that way, hope and action go hand in hand. So today, we are not only facing a climate crisis, we are also facing a crisis of imagination. For years, the dominant narrative about the climate has been one of collapse. I'm sure you're all familiar with the scenes we see from the frontiers of the climate change. We see the floods, the fires, the storms. And all these are real and undeniable threats and results of climate change. Working in a green think tank in Concito, I'm so aware of that. I work with it every day, and we talk about it constantly. But when fear becomes the only story, it paralyzes us. Fear alone makes people give up even before they begin. And that is why we need bold leaders like you, everybody with influence, to draw up new and attractive visions for the future that we can build. Visions that can bridge the present and the possible future and inspire people to act. Through my work with this book, I have come to realize that hope is a real superpower. It's not a naive optimism, don't think that way. It's a conscientious decision to believe in the possibility of change. Because hope allows us to picture a better life in a transformed society, one defined not by sacrifice, but by well-being, by resilience, and by shared prosperity. So, let's start with a simple question. It's also the one we used in the book. The question is, what if? The question allows us to dream. It opens a door into our imagination and to think beyond crisis and envision a better life, what it could be. In the book, I have invited 14 voices, thought leaders from all walks of life, chefs, psychologists, to architects, activists, and professors, to share the visions of the everyday life in 2050. They talk about what we eat, how we travel, how we live, even what we wear. And they also talk about the values and the norms we will have by then. These are not distant dreams. They are practical and inspiring glimpses of the future we can build if we dare to act. So what do these visions have in common? They describe a good life in 2050 that is not driven by endless consumption. You can see some of the topic coming up here. It's driven by meaningful communities and closeness to nature and a stronger human connections. The green economy is cheaper, leaving more room for people to live their life. It's a future where quality matters more than quantity, and where health and purpose and creative power surpass material wealth. Technology and innovation plays a vital role, but they do it as tools to enable balance between people, nature, and progress. So let's take a look at some of the dreams and visions from the book. I think you are all familiar with this guy here, Claus Meyer. He is our famous Danish chef. He says that my dream is that by 2050, most people are able to make simple plant-based meals. That is not the way it is today. So that's truly a vision and a dream to Claus, I know. And I'm sure you also know Connie Hedegaard, our former EU Commissioner for Climate Action. She says, by 2050, consumerism no longer brings any status. Quality and durability have replaced quantity and bling. And the last one I will mention comes from the well-known green investor and entrepreneur Tommy Ahlers. You might know of him as well. He says the green transition he's standing in 2050 and he thinks what has happened, and he says this green transition has become the biggest business opportunity since the internet. It drives growth, but it does it in a circular and green way. The underlying message here is clear. Status quo is not an option. Business as usual locks us into crisis. So, a green transformation is not only necessary, it's also possible. It can enrich our lives, and I think people should know about it. And that is why we must change the climate narrative to create greater unity. It should not be just about some of what we just heard, difficult CO2 targets, also alarming tipping points, and political conflicts and battles. Climate is often a very technical and abstract discussion. To many people, they just don't understand it, so they turn away. So, when we talk about what the narrative should be, we should also talk about what would the good life be like when we have success with this transformation. What would it be like when you look at this everyday life? And this conversation should be open, it should be collective, and it should be hopeful. one that shifts our focus from fear to possibility. Because hope is also a strategy. It's what connects policy with people, it inspires investments, it drives innovation, and it sustains momentum. Strong visions create meaning for people. Visions act as a compass when resistance arises. They attract us, they pull us, because they are filled with opportunity, not only with loss. History shows that bold visions has guided societies through every great transition. Think about President Kennedy's vision to land a man on the moon. Not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Many thought it impossible, but when it succeeded, it transformed America's self-belief. It lit a positive spark, and a big one. And when everybody saw Earth from space for the first time, it changed our perspective. We realized how fragile and precious our planet is, and that we have a shared responsibility to protect it. Today, we need that same kind of vision and resolve in battling the climate crisis. So, when we look ahead to COP30 in Berlin, let's ask ourselves, what future do we want? A future defined by hesitation or by courage? By fear or by hope? I think you know what I would answer, but now I give the question to you. The participants in my book chooses hope over fear. They dare to describe the good life in 2050, and in doing so, they remind us that transformation is not just about survival, it's about rethinking our options. The climate crisis is real. Everyone in this room knows that. But so is our capacity to imagine, to act, and to lead. We do have tough choices and battles in front of us. There will be sacrifices and that will be compromises. But we will not get there without being hopeful. If we choose hope as part of our strategy, then indeed, the future will be green and it will be better. Thank you. Good.
Thank you so much, Gita. What a great challenge for all of us to think about that vision in a one-liner, as you had on the slide. We will, as I said, wrap up now. So I invite again Karen Ellerman to share some closing words with us.
Well, time moves fast, and I think it really has been inspiring minutes. We cannot talk about hours here. We've had like a good hour together, and thank you, of course, to all our ministers. I mean, they are working tirelessly. And they're on the move already to new meetings. But listening to them, this honesty that we have on stage here is also really encouraging me hope, giving me hope. Hope is a strategy. Thank you, Gitta, for saying that so clearly. So I think the discussions we've witnessed here and participated in, I mean, they have been very honest and also forward-looking. And Susanne, thank you very much for this. You said in the beginning it's difficult to give such a big report, and you give me 8 to 10 minutes to bring it on. Communication is hard, but you really do it so well and so clear. So I think progress is happening. I mean, we all know that, yes, and it's not happening fast enough. And researchers are increasingly vocal in their concern, and rightly so. And I think no doubt that COP30 in Belém is going to be a defining moment. And I think it's also important to say that it will take place in a region that is deeply affected by environmental degradation and also very, very central to the global climate system, because the Amazon is not just a symbol. It's a living reality that must be protected. And there, no doubt that we in the Nordics, we do have a role to play, not only in the negotiations, we will definitely have that, but of course also showcasing what constructive, inclusive climate leadership looks like. And that's why hope is the strategy here. So I will just say that our joint Nordic Pavilion will be our platform, but it's the ideas, it's the partnerships, and it's the commitments that we bring with us that will make the difference. So this conversation tonight, has really helped us, I think, align and prepare, hopefully. So I hope that you all leave with new insights, new connections, keep on with the mingling, and then, of course, also with a renewed sense of purpose. So let's carry this momentum forward from Stockholm to Berlin, and let's make sure that the Nordics keep on mattering, right? Not just in words, but in action. So, Åsa, thank you very much to you for doing this job here, and also thank you online. I'll leave the word to you again, as we agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I think we heard both the need for the bigger storylines to come through the noise now at COP30, telling the Nordic success stories that we have. We heard also some more technical discussions on certain issue areas, negative emissions, carbon sinks, etc. We heard many ministers talk about these Nordic values of pragmatism, innovation, and collaboration. I want to add just one thing also that I think is that I'm proud of is accountability and credibility. So I'm glad that we have climate councils in several of the Nordic countries, also ensuring to keep our governments accountable and actually delivering what they say. So with that, thank you everyone for joining tonight, and keep sharing, as Karen said, what you are planning to do at COP30 or from home, and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Yo, shake the booty, I shake the booty, roll, shake the booty, oh, booty, I would be easy. Oh, shake it, right, and that's all. You show yourself, yeah, I hate you, yeah, and that's it. I need to be to you, yeah, then it's not every day. I can remember when I was a guy, so